Before we get started, please go over to Amazon.com and grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice. If you have an African-American son in public school, you need this book because I teach you the many ways that public schools mistreat African-American boys and what you can do to help your son. So go over there and get your copy immediately. Eliminating the Department of Education is a vicious and direct attack on Black students. First, let me say, this is the fight for educational equity. This is the civil rights fight of our lifetime. This isn't just about politics. This is about power, access, and the future of Black students in America, our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. Trump and MAGA are anxious to eliminate the Department of Education, and on the surface, some people may say, so what? Schools are local anyway. But that's not how this works. The Department of Education isn't about micromanaging schools. It's about keeping states from taking us back to the days of segregation, underfunding, and outright racial discrimination in education. I wrote about this in my book, Education and Justice: How Public Schools Fail African American Males. Black students have always faced systemic barriers in education, from discriminatory discipline policies to underfunded schools. The data proves that when left unchecked, states will deny Black children a quality education. History has already shown us what happens when states control education without federal oversight. And if we let them dismantle the Department of Education, we will see that history repeat itself. Now, let's talk about where this all started. The federal government didn't always play a role in education. In fact, it wasn't until the 1950s and 60s that the government really stepped in. And the reason was simple: states were failing Black students. In 1867, the government created the first federal Office of Education, but it had no real power. It was mostly just collecting data. Now, fast forward to 1954, Brown versus Board of Education changed everything. The Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. It actually said it was inherently evil. But what happened next? Did states immediately start integrating schools? Of course not. They fought it. Southern states came up with every trick in the book to avoid integrating schools. And it wasn't just that they wanted Black kids. The civil rights movement just wanted Black kids to sit beside white kids. It was because the Plessy v. Ferguson decision, which ruled a separate but equal approach, it failed. The kids were separated, the races were separated, but it definitely was not equal. Hello, everyone. I got great news. The merch is finally here. We've been waiting and waiting, but we can finally begin branding our channel. But we need your help to get our brand out there. If you like what we provide and like what you see, please go to the channel and grab your hoodie, your t-shirt, your mug, and we got more designs and products on the way. Just visit our YouTube channel at the Defiant Lawyers Network. Also, we will donate a portion of each dollar you spend on our merch towards some nonprofit. And remember, as always, stay woke. And so after the Brown case, Virginia went as far as shutting down entire public school systems instead of complying with the desegregation orders. That's why the federal government had to step in to force states to do what was right. And that's how we got federal programs like the Elementary and Secondary Education Act in 1965, which gave funding to schools serving low-income students. That funding wasn't charity. It was a direct response to the fact that Black schools were being systematically underfunded. Then in 1979, Jimmy Carter made it official. the Department of Education became a cabinet-level agency. May he rest in peace. And the entire reason it was created was to centralize education policy and funding, oversight, so states couldn't keep pulling the same old dirty tricks. And let me tell you, conservatives have been trying to get rid of it ever since. Ronald Reagan wanted to dismantle it in the 80s. He failed, thank God. Trump and Betsy DeVos worked hard to gut it in 2017. They failed, thank God. Now Trump and his allies are doubling down. They want to eliminate the Department of Education completely, handing full control of education back to the same states that have intentionally undermined the education of black students for centuries. Now, let's talk about how they plan to eliminate or weaken the Department of Education. They won't just shut it down overnight. That would be too obvious, and Trump would need legislative help anyway. He couldn't do it by executive order. Instead, they will use a step-by-step strategy to dismantle it piece by piece. So first, what they'll do is they'll cut funding. They will defund the Department of Education. Congress has already slashed $1 billion from the department from its budget. They're targeting federal grants, research programs, and diversity initiatives as I speak, things that directly benefit black students. Just having the right kind of research is so important. It was the reason why I was able to write an evidence-based book on how public schools fail African-American children. Now, when they drain the budget, they force the department to do less with less. Next, they will weaken enforcement. The Office for Civil Rights inside the Department of Education is responsible for investigating racial discrimination in schools, which is a huge problem. Under Trump, this office was gutted. Complaints from black students, students with disabilities, and low-income students are ignored. And if the Department of Education cannot investigate discrimination, schools will get away with anything. Then they will shift control to the states. They will push for more block grants, which gives federal education money, which should be going to low-income school districts, but they will give that to states with almost no rules on how to use it. Historically, when states get block grants, they cut funding for black schools first. They also expand school vouchers and charter schools, which divert public money to private schools, schools that don't have to follow any federal civil rights laws at all. And then the end goal is to make the Department of Education so weak and ineffective that eliminating it doesn't seem like a big deal at all. By the time they officially shut it down, most of its responsibilities would have already been gone. This is exactly what they did to affirmative action. They weakened it, then they got rid of it. This is exactly what they're doing with voting rights. First, they gutted the Voting Rights Act. Now they're making it harder to vote. And now they're coming for public education. This isn't just a policy change, folks. This is an attack on civil rights, on racial justice, and on the future of our students, of black kids. I told you this was coming. And we have to pay attention. We have to get engaged, because if that happens, black students will pay a heavy price. Let's be real. States like Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and others already fail black and brown students. They don't need to wait for the Department of Education to disappear. They're already showing us what they'll do when left unchecked. Take Mississippi. It ranks dead last in education almost every year. They consistently have the lowest test scores, lowest graduation rates, and the worst outcomes for black students. Texas has been cutting public education funding for years while funneling billions into school voucher programs that benefit wealthy white families at the expense of public schools. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis has pushed laws that censor black history, limit discussions on race, and ban books that teach the truth about America's past. And in Alabama, sweet home Alabama, Black students are more than twice as likely to attend underfunded schools compared to white students. These states already rank among the worst in public education, and yet Trump wants them to control the education of Black students without any federal oversight. So when Republicans say they want to return control to the states, yes, what they really mean is they want more states to follow the model of Florida, Mississippi, etc. Those states that are underfunding Black schools, censoring history, and making sure racial disparities in education go unchecked. Now imagine what happens if the Department of Education is gone. If states like Mississippi and Texas are already failing Black students with federal oversight, what do you think they'll do with no accountability or federal oversight at all? History and the present tell us exactly what will happen, and we can't afford to let it. Let's be real. State control has never worked in our favor. That's all I'm trying to tell you. Southern states during slavery made it illegal to educate Black students and kept that resistance up throughout Jim Crow. And even after the Brown v. Board of Education case, many Southern states fought integration with everything they had. Like I told you, Virginia not only closed down entire school districts, it had its, quote, massive resistance strategy. These states just found ways to keep Black students in underfunded, low-quality schools. And today they're still doing it. Now let's talk a little bit about school funding. We know most schools are funded by property taxes. And that means that schools in white, wealthy communities are well-funded, while Black communities, especially low-income Black communities, are underfunded with outdated books, overcrowded classrooms, and fewer of the advanced courses. Now, decades of research show that well-funded schools produce better student outcomes, as well as well-qualified teachers. But without federal oversight, states will have less reason to fix that funding gap and less access to federal dollars, because those dollars are going to be directed where? Again, to wealthy white schools that need the money the least. Now let's talk about something just as serious, school discipline. I've alluded to it already. Black students are suspended and expelled at much higher rates than white students, not because they misbehave more, but because of racial bias in school discipline. Studies show that Black students are 4 times more likely to be suspended than white students for the exact same infractions. Let me say it again, because some of you come to this issue thinking that Black kids are the worst in the school. And you certainly could point to some anecdotes to try to prove your point. But when you look at national studies, again, you will see that Black kids are suspended 4 times the rate of white students for the exact same infractions. This is how the school to prison pipeline starts. When Black kids are criminalized at an early age, they're more likely to drop out. In fact, they call it being pushed out. That's one of the reasons why I dropped out in the 10th grade. More likely to be arrested once they hit the streets and drop out of high school, and less likely to ever reach their full potential. And here's the kicker. Without the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, once again, and I can't say it enough, there is no accountability. These states will be able to do exactly what they want to do. No one to enforce policies against discriminatory discipline. No one to stop schools from pushing Black children out of classrooms and into the criminal justice system. I broke all of this down in my book, every bit of it. It's a direct result of racial bias and punitive policies that treat our kids as threats instead of students. But believe it or not, it doesn't stop there, folks. Let me talk a few minutes about the curriculum. Right now, certain states are already rewriting history curriculums. I told you earlier, we all have seen Florida pass laws banning discussions on systemic racism, a real thing. They even tried to reframe slavery as a skills development program. Yes, you heard that right. If the Department of Education disappears, more states will follow Florida. Black history will be erased. Our children will be taught lies about America's history, and there will be no federal agency to stop it. No one to look to say, hey, you need to stop this. This is unconstitutional. This is wrong morally. No, we won't have anyone to look to correct those schools. Now, what's already happening? Congress has already cut $1 billion from the Department of Education's budget. And guess who's getting hit the hardest? Black students. Diversity, equity, and inclusion programs gutted. Funding for research on effective teaching strategies gutted. Special education funding gutted. That means fewer resources, fewer interventions, and fewer opportunities for our children. And this is before they even eliminate the department entirely. So let's be clear. Getting rid of the Department of Education is vicious, and it would be catastrophic for our children. And one reason for that is because it funds low-income schools. It enforces civil rights protections. It ensures students with disabilities get the support they need. Those kids with disabilities, and they disproportionately tend to be African American because African American kids are disproportionately identified as special education kids. So cutting funding for disability programs will also impact our children mostly. States are going to have full control over all of these issues, over all of the education policies. And I've already shown you what they will do. They're going to defund public schools that serve Black communities. Those resources will get gutted. All the diversity programs, they're already on the chopping block. And they will continue to rewrite history. And you know, if we forget history, we repeat history. So this is not just about education. This is about racial justice. It's about civil rights. It's about the future of our community. I want to drive that point home. It is the future of our community as African American people. We cannot afford to sit back and let them take us backwards. We got to fight. We got to fight for the education of our children. We have to fight for our kids, because eliminating the Department of Education, once again, is a vicious and direct attack on our children. And we cannot let that happen without putting up a fight like they have never seen before. Thank you for watching this video. I am Reverend and Civil Rights Attorney Augustus Corbett. And no matter what they say, stay woke.